really great vendors. And the second thing, too, is might as well start announcing it now just because some people have asked me about it. Christmas is on a Sunday this year, right? Everyone realize that? So what we're going to do is instead of having a Sunday morning service, we'll have a Saturday morning service. Same time, 10 a.m., Saturday morning, Christmas Eve. Not Christmas Eve candlelight or anything like that. So if you do your normal Christmas Eve stuff with your family, won't get in the way of that. And it's not going to really be a Christmas Eve, like quiet candlelight type feel either. It's going to be celebratory. It's going to be celebrating the light of Christ, really putting the capstone on our Advent series. So not a service on Sunday, a service on Saturday. And of course, we will keep announcing that as the weeks go on. Stand together as we sing our next two songs. Oh, one quick third announcement too. At the end of today's service, I'm going to be, hopefully, a little shorter with the sermon, and we're going to have just a time of remembrance for Alma Jenkins, because as most of you know, she did pass away this past week, and I'm going to just say a little bit to honor her memory and something that can inspire us all to live the way she lived.
Oh, the vapor of it all. It's a chasing of the wind, the substance of the form, so pale and thin. Let the veil of earth be open up our hearts. May your light cause us to shine so bright that we bring hope into the dark.
Jesus was once asked by some religious rulers, when will the kingdom of God come? When would it finally show itself? And Jesus replied, the coming of the kingdom of God is not something that can be observed, nor will people say, here it is, or there it is, because the kingdom of God is in your midst. What does that mean? Like, how can a kingdom or a new way of ruling not be announced, not be clearly visible? Like, think about this past week, right? We had an election, and votes are coming in, news networks are calling states, and then at the end, there's a winner, there's a loser. One person concedes, the other person accepts. It would be so ridiculous for somebody to get up and say, the presidency of the United States is not something that can be observed. It is neither here nor there. Like, what? Well, then what is it? We see a little more clearly like how it functions when Jesus meets specifically one of the religious rulers, whose name is Nicodemus, and he says to him, because they're talking about the same thing, where's the kingdom of God? How will it show itself? And Jesus answered, very truly, I tell you that no one can enter the kingdom of God unless they are born of water and of the Spirit. Flesh gives birth to flesh, but Spirit gives birth to spirit. That's why I say you must be born again. The wind blows wherever it pleases. You hear its sound, but you cannot tell where it comes from or where it's going. So it is with everyone born of the Spirit. So we get a little step closer. Jesus says the kingdom of God is among you. Well, who's you? People who are formed by the Spirit. But then it's still not really something that's easy to grasp, because he says the people who are born of the Spirit, it's like a wind that blows. You might see it, you might not. You can hear the trees rustling, but when you turn around, it's gone again. So it still doesn't give us a lot to grasp. But luckily, the Apostle Paul gives us an example of that rustling tree. He gives us an example of what it looks like when the Spirit moves. And you know, Jesus' words, the Spirit's like a wind. Being born again is like a wind that blows and you can't really see it. That's the same language for the Spirit that Genesis 1 uses, isn't it? The Spirit hovered over the waters and a great wind blew. Both in the Genesis 1 and the recreation story of the flood, a wind blew. The wind, the Spirit, God's creative energy is a way to think about it. So what does it look like when this divine creative energy shows itself in someone's life? Well, the Apostle Paul told us that it looks like this: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. When those qualities appear, right, you know you've seen the kingdom of God. You know you've seen the people formed by the Spirit. But we also know what the opposite of that looks like, and that's really what this series is about. We know that the opposite of love, joy, peace is anxiety, fear, destruction, distrust. The Bible has a word for all of that when it comes together and makes systems. It's called the world. The world is built on the opposite of the movement of the Spirit. Struggle, violence, fear. Not light, darkness. So in trying to expose the darkness as darkness, to see it for what it really is, we've looked now for 2 weeks at the way darkness functions both within ourselves and small groups, and then how it flows out into broader culture, broader societies, and forms very civilizations. We've looked at stories of Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, to help us shine light on these ideas. The first week we talked about imitation and desire. As people, we imitate each other to the point we actually imitate the other person's desire. And of course, last week we heard that results in rivalries that become so great they threaten to destroy our very existence as a species. And so what happens? Humans came up with scapegoating. If we can blame one person for those problems, if we can put all of that anxiety and fear off of ourselves and put it onto them and destroy them, we'll have relative peace and harmony. But we saw that that's a sham. We saw that the crucifixion of Jesus demands that we look at that for what it is, and it's a lie. And we talked about the crucifixion of Jesus is the final act of scapegoating that undermines the system, shows it to be a sham, and allows us to move on to find a better way to be human. It forms a new humanity, to use the Apostle Paul's phrase. So we talked about don't try to put the crucifixion back into the scapegoating mechanism. Don't try to think, God was real happy when we killed goats, but he's even happier when we killed his son. That's not the point. The point is not that God was just so pleased with the brutal murder of his son. No, it's that when we hear phrases such as Christ is a better sacrifice, when we see phrases like that in the Bible, he's a better sacrifice because he ends sacrifices. He doesn't replicate them. He doesn't play in to the violence our systems are built on. And now we're in our third week. So there's been a movement in these series of sermons. First, it's kind of like a breath. We breathe in, air goes in our lungs, and we breathe out, air goes out, right? The first week, we looked at who we are inside. The second week, we saw what that means for the broader world. We're going to do the same thing today. Take a second breath. Look at who we are inside. Next week, we'll breathe out and see what it means for our broader culture, our broader civilization. Keep in mind, too, that we're moving towards Advent, where we'll be celebrating our hope for a world of peace, a world of joy, built, constructed through love. And so we see how these last 2 weeks mirror that. Rather than hope for a better world built on peace, we imitate desire and create a world built on rivalry and built on sacrifice. So today we'll be looking at, rather than a joyful embrace of life that leads us to love others, we tend to have a general anxiety towards life that hurts our broader relationships. There's a phrase that I heard growing up in church. Now, you may have heard this phrase too. I don't know. You may have even said it at some point. Some of my friends would say it. I remember very clearly one time that my friend Jake and I, we were having this debate over some stupid theological point that now, looking back, doesn't even matter. And he used this phrase as to counteract one of my arguments. But it wasn't the first time I heard it. I heard it all the time. Everyone is born with a God-shaped hole in their heart. Have you heard that phrase? You ever heard that? Got some nods? Everyone's born with a God-shaped hole in their heart. What does that mean? The intent behind that is to say, look, you're born incomplete. Something in you is lacking, and there's only one thing that can fill it: God. Not money, not power, not success, God, right? That's the idea. And then even in the secular world, outside of religion, we see the same idea, right? Think about Christmas time. It's the time of year where every TV show, every song, every message we get is, money won't make you happy, only family will. Oh, it's so sweet, right? Nobody believes it. Nobody believes it. But we like to say it one time a year to ease the pain. And so we say, yeah, we're all missing something, and only family can fulfill us. Only friendships can fulfill us. Money can't fulfill us. Or only God can fill us. Only God can make us whole. Only God can make us complete. When people say things like this, they're hinting at something very real. There is a universal experience of feeling incomplete. There's a sense in which all of us do have this feeling that we have a gap within our very being, or a lack. Something's lacking. Something's missing. The very fact that you're a conscious being brings with it some pretty traumatic events, doesn't it? The very fact that you have to, day in and day out, figure out ways to relate to other people who are not you and are most often not like you is traumatic. We have broken relationships. We have just strife and violence. But even beyond that, just knowing how to break the ice when you meet someone new. Have you ever had that feeling where someone is looking at you, and you know they're looking at you, and it's very disconcerting, isn't it? Why? It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be disconcerting. But it is, because as humans, we just tend to define ourselves, as we saw, by the other person. And so we have these very traumatic events in general of having to relate to other people. And unfortunately, some people have very specific, deep, truly shattering traumatic events, right? Many people suffer abuse at the hand of a loved one. Many people are taken advantage of by the person they never thought would take advantage of them. Many people live their entire lives scraping away, suffering under the thumb of an oppressive government. Many people live on less than $1 a day. So besides just the general humanity of us, besides the general trauma that comes from being a human, there are specific traumas, specific hurts, specific pains. And what these traumas do is serve to really punch a hole in our very being. That's where our sense of lack comes from, our sense of something's missing, something's incomplete about us. And so many people feel shame or guilt or anxiety. It can play itself out in different ways. Some people don't have those debilitating senses of gap, debilitating senses of lack, but we all know something's not quite right. Something could be better about ourselves. It's very popular today to talk about transformation, right? Everybody wants to experience transformation, spiritual formation. All of this language speaks to the fact that we all realize something feels incomplete within us, a general sense of lack. The best thing to do with this lack is just to face it head on, and we'll talk about that later. But before we do, most people deal with this gap, this lack, in one of three ways. They can either attempt to fill it, fill the hole in their heart. They can attempt to forget it, to flee it, cover it up, pretend it's not there. Or they can attempt to forward it, pass it on to somebody else. We know what that one looks like, right? How often does somebody who suffers abuse become an abuser themselves? It's extremely common. My son Braylon's favorite movie right now is this movie called The Wild. It's a Disney feature film, and it's pretty awful. It's it didn't go to theaters or anything. It completely is a ripoff of the movie Madagascar. Have you ever seen that? It's a story of these animals who, because of all the shenanigans, have to escape their zoo, and it's the soundtrack is terrible. It's terribly acted. But there's this one scene that's really powerful. There's this lion, and he has a lion cub. In the beginning of the movie, you see that he's always telling his lion cub about all his grand escapades when he used to live in the wild. They live in a zoo now, but I used to hunt wildebeests. I used to, roar with the best of them. I used to fight jackals and hyenas. And his son, born in captivity, is just beaten down, by his father's expectations. Feels bad about himself. He can't even roar yet. He's just a little cub. He's got this little squeaky voice. And he becomes more and more distant from his father until eventually he feels the need to run away. And that's what gets the story started, right? Well, later on to the movie, you find out that this lion, his name's Samson, is lying. He was born in captivity too. He never had all these escapades in the wild. And there's this part where he flashes back when he's a little lion cub. And he's in a circus. And they bring him out for the people. And he tries to roar. He tries to be a big, bad lion. And his little squeaky voice comes out, just like his son. And the whole crowd laughs, and he feels stupid, and he's embarrassed. And when he goes back to his father, who really was born in the wild, his father says, if you'd been born in the wild, you'd know how to roar. And he leaves him, lets his son be sold to the zoo instead of the circus. And he's like crying out like, Daddy, Daddy, and the other lion just like doesn't even care. It's pretty traumatic for like a 4-year-old to be watching this, but it's so deeply true. Because what happens then is Samson does the exact same thing to his son. That pain he felt from his father rejecting him because he's a cub. He feels the need to make himself be this big bad lion and literally ostracizes his son in the exact same way his father ostracized him. It's a lot easier to watch when it's 2 lions, isn't it? It's a lot easier to deal with. But it happens all the time between humans. So we can forward it on to people. We can try to flee it. We can forget that we feel empty inside. We can try to forget that there's a sense of lack in us. We can become alcoholics. We can become drug users. We can become avid exercisers, working out all the time, constantly running away from our sense of lack. Or we can try to fill it. And this seems to be one of the most common ones in our culture. This seems to be the way that people most often deal with their feeling of emptiness or loneliness, the result of their traumas. We can fill it with all kinds of things, right? Ideals. If I can just be a good father, my life would be complete. If I can achieve some great act in my life, if I could make a lot of money, be a good employee. We could fill it with another person. If I could just find my one true love. I hear the teens talk about this all the time. Like, oh, I want a girlfriend, I want a boyfriend. Like, no. Don't you know that makes life harder than easier? Like, a person, you can't take a person and put them in the gap. It won't work. And the thing is that there's this tendency for us to think that some ways to fill the gap are bad, like money, sex, drugs. And some ways are good, family, God, religion. But the problem is the very story of the ability to fill the gap, that very story is a lie. It doesn't matter if it's something good. It doesn't matter if it's God or money. The attempt to fill it is itself a fantasy that will not deliver. It's a fantasy, a story that we construct, but it's not true. There's always a voice whispering to us that it is true. There's always a voice saying, you can be more. You're not good enough. There's something within you missing. Fill it. At the risk of sounding judgmental, I think that this is part of the rise of the big, flashy, charismatic movements. The come on Sundays and put your hands up and get that experience. I don't know how many times I hear people say they want an experience with God. I don't know if it's a coincidence that the lighting and the smoke and the music fully mimic nightclubs, right? People are just going to both places to fill the gap. They're just going to both places to escape the feeling. It doesn't matter if you call it God, if you're running from your problems. Adam and Eve knew this very well. The biblical story of Adam and Eve gives a name to this voice that tells us we can fill, we can be better, we can be complete, we can be more. It's the serpent. You'll be like God if you get this certain thing. What did they want? What was it about God that Adam and Eve wanted? Like, is it just the power? I mean, no, it was the completeness, the wholeness. You're missing something. You're not quite there. You don't have wisdom in this case. You're not complete like God is complete, but you can be. You can be everything you need to be if you eat the magic fruit. And so they did. And what happened? It got worse. They ran and hid. They felt shame. They felt anxiety. They felt fear. When you try to take any object and fill the gap, it gets worse because the lack in us, the gap, is like a debt. that can't be paid off. It's like a debt that's got a crushing interest rate, and you're only able to make the minimum payments. So like every time you pay, your balance just keeps going up. That's the way to think about this lack. It's a gap that is a debt to us. And you can't pay it off. The only way to approach this debt, this lack, is to render it nothing, to forgive it, to live with it, but take away its sting, take away its demand over our lives, strip it of its power. There's a sense in which we won't ever be complete, right? Whole, fixed. We can't escape it. That's not the goal. We can't be Adam and Eve and just eat a magic fruit, press the easy button like Staples has, and just now everything's good. There's no magic button, there's no magic fruit. And when we think there is, it's going to lead us further down the hole. The only thing that can free us from the crushing sense of having to fill the gap in our lives is a word that the Bible calls grace. And what grace tells us is that you are accepted. Not because you're trying to fix your problems. Not because you can fill the gap, cover up the lack, but with the lack. In all of your humanity, you are accepted. This isn't some kind of just, cliche platitude. It's not where we say, I'm okay, you're okay, everything's okay. It's not naivety. It's not forgetting it, covering over the lack. Remember, that's one of the ways to deal with it. It's not that. It's embracing it and saying, I'm not okay. You're not okay. That's not okay. But that's okay. It's really being a church. The only way to face our gap, our lack, our sin, to use the biblical word, is to come together and form a community of people where you accept each other because of your humanity, in your humanity, in your lack. Now, the tendency sometimes is to think, well, if everyone just accepts everyone the way they are, and this lack creates debilitating, symptoms in our lives, then how will we ever move on? How can we ever find healing? How can we ever find any sense of progress or forward motion if everyone just accepts everybody? That's the beauty. It's like a big trick, except really the trick is the serpent, right? And we just hear his voice more commonly. You can fix it, you got to work hard, feel guilty about it. That guilt can be a motivator, and then you can change yourself. No, transformation, right? Our buzzword, change. Healing from our traumas can only come when we embrace those traumas. Can only come when we face them head on, admit that they've created within us a sense of lack, and accept each other in them. We will find healing, we will find change, we'll find transformation, not because we've fixed the problem, but because the problem was rendered useless. The debt, it's not paid off, it's just forgiven. Rendered completely powerless. Because it's the voice of the serpent, the voice of the ego, the voice within us that tells us you can fix your problems, you're wrong, you're incomplete, you're broken, you're dirty. You have to make yourself clean, you have to make yourself good. That's the voice that is truly a lie. Yes, your traumas have created a lack in you, but that doesn't mean you're broken, that you're bad, that you're not unworthy, that you are unlovable. And so we have to embrace our humanity. We cannot try to be like gods, right? Completely unbroken in every way, above our world, fully without traumas, floating on clouds. We're humans. It's hard to be a human. It's difficult. It causes us to feel empty, alone. There's a song that I just love, absolutely. I want to, at some point, do it here. It's by this artist named Luke Sittle Singh. He's British. And it's called We Belong Together. And there's this phrase in it where he says, you don't belong. Like, it talks about how he's singing to this person, and this person feels broken, feels empty, lack, all this. And he says, you don't belong. I don't belong. We cannot belong together. To me, that's like the beautiful picture of a church. There's a sense in which we all feel loneliness. We all feel separate from each other. We all feel lack. And we can feel that together. And in doing that, we will finally find freedom from the crushing symptoms of our lack, from passing on abusive tendencies, from lashing out at people, from physical ailments, from repressing our pain. We can find healing in grace. We can find healing in embrace. And now I want to change gears slightly, but only slightly. I want to remember together Alma Jenkins. I went to the memorial service for her on Friday morning, and what struck me over and over again was that there were a couple recurring themes. And the first was that she was kind. Everyone said that. She was so kind. And in a world of division and strife and distrust, kindness is one of the most powerful forces we could imagine. And so when someone is truly, deeply kind, it's something we have to celebrate. It's something we have to emulate about her. The second thing was that she remained positive. I didn't have the pleasure of knowing Alma for very long, but I heard story after story about how she was always positive in the face of difficulty. And then specifically, Jerry told me that she went through some really hard times. It wasn't naivety. It wasn't running from her traumas, covering over the lack. But rather, she faced difficulty head on, and to use Jerry's exact phrase, made her own way through it. Her positivity was a fierce positivity from all of the accounts. I hope Jerry doesn't mind that I say this, but she told me that Alma specifically influenced her very heavily on how to approach difficulty in life. What a testimony to somebody's life. What an honor to somebody's life to say that they specifically influenced you deeply. I think that her approach to life, which is really the approach to life I'm advocating today, can be summed up in a phrase that she used. The story was told on Friday that if somebody said to her, "Have a great day," or "How's your day going?" she would say, if you want to have a great day, you have to make it a great day. That's it, isn't it? Take responsibility. Face the trauma in your life. Face the lack. And in doing so, you can move past it. That's a life that we want. Her life is a life we desire to emulate, to see in our own lives. And it's the life that relies on grace. It's the life that embraces the radical acceptance that we're talking about. That's probably why the song Amazing Grace meant so much to Alma. I was told it was her favorite hymn and that she loved it best when it was sung a cappella. So today we're going to do that together. We're going to sing together the first verse of Amazing Grace. Sing it remembering Alma. And if you didn't know her, then sing it with the full resolve and embrace of life that Alma demonstrated for us. And in doing this, we will honor her life. Sing with me. Amazing